Hi, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for joining me for this IPA talk. Grateful as always to have with me our Illinois State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Tony Sanders, here with me to just chat about a couple of things happening in the state related to education, of course. And who knows, Tony, who knows what else might even pop up. You having the eclectic background that you had, there's always maybe something interesting that we could discuss. But thanks for being with me. How's your fall been?
It's been a great fall. It's wonderful this year just to be out in schools and to be able to see kids participating and to see the joy on their faces as they arrive to school. It's one of the nice things about being in this new role is carving out at least one day a week to visit schools and visit with their superintendents and principals and actually be able to see what's happening across this state. It's really amazing what our educators are doing every day across this great state.
Yeah, no doubt. It's fun to see the pictures and things like that come across from your social media feeds and things. And I know one of the other things that talking about school visits here that you've talked to the ISB team about is getting out and making some of those visits themselves as well, right?
Absolutely. So one of the things that, and everybody seems at the state board to be very supportive of this idea. What I've asked them to do is to go work out of a school district or a school for the day, doing the same job that they do here at the state board, but doing it at a school district. So if you're an ISB staff member who's never worked in a school or worked in a school district, the intent is to help them understand what happens in schools and in districts on a daily basis. And at the same time, to give school districts and school leaders the opportunity to find out what we do here at the state board on a daily basis, because I don't think there's a lot of understanding of all the work that we do here at the state board to try to support schools. So it has that twofold purpose. So if principals or superintendents hear of ISB staff member wanting to visit you for a day, please open your door. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I love that. Love the opportunity for relationship building, better understanding of the complexities of all the jobs that have to be done, obviously at the school level, but also within the agency. You know, that school code doesn't get any shorter on a yearly basis, right? So that means more work that the agency has to do typically on an annual basis.
And so, for each of those, and for every half inch of the school code that we have added, you'll have a corresponding 1 inch in administrative rules that go along with
That's
it.
True. That's true. And that's where the real mandate comes into play is with regards to that. Well, speaking of legislation, we're in the middle of veto session here, and just for context, today's date is November 7th. We'll probably put this out once veto session is all said and done. And I know there's not a lot happening with education right now, but one thing I did want to reference, Tony, and just to offer up, our thanks as an association here is what's currently in place is a bill that's going to push the effective dates or change the effective dates of several pieces of legislation. One of those is the state mandated training legislation that we worked to get passed this past spring, where the effective date was to be January 1 of 24, and that's going to be pushed back to July 1 of 2024, which will be helpful on a variety of counts. But I just publicly wanted to say thanks to you and your team for helping us get that original piece of legislation passed, so that we could reduce the frequency of several of the state mandated trainings that we've got that personally from your own experience that do chew up. And that's not that the trainings necessarily aren't important. It's just doing them year after year after year, the redundancy, it starts to probably lose some of the intended effect. And of course, it burns up a lot of time, for people to take those things. So we see that as positive, and obviously the feedback from the field has been positive. So just appreciate your support with that.
Of course. Yeah, I remember having to do those myself. I remember coming out of U46, I had about 26 of them I'd have to do on an annual basis.
Yeah, it seems about right.
Fully understand.
Yeah. You bet. Well, let's move on here, Tony. Recently, the state report card was put out, and I know, I personally had a few conversations with that as part of other stakeholder meetings and things, and you shared out some of the various components, and of course, it's been out in the press now. But thought this might be a nice opportunity for you just to share, especially from a building leader's perspective, just some of the key findings from the state report card, and obviously. Always something for us to be working on, but it also, when you think about being a couple of years past the pandemic, some real positive things for us to see in this year's state report card as well.
There's a lot of celebrations in this year's report card. A lot of the metrics moved in the right direction in significant ways. Doesn't mean we don't have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of work to do as a state in our schools and in our districts, but to see the significant gains in English language arts across the state is a sign of good recovery in the wake of the pandemic. Math, of course, increased a little bit, not as significantly as English language arts, but certainly is moving at least a little bit in the right direction. But then some of the other metrics that we saw, Jason, that really were significant, our graduation rate, the highest in 13 years. That's a testament to our schools and our teachers and the work they're doing every day. Ninth graders on track to graduate, that earlier leading indicator of whether or not a child will graduate on time, is moving in the right direction in a positive way. So we have a lot to be proud of. I think you'd agree with me, and I know our schools, every school I visited, is having the same conversations around chronic absenteeism. And, I recognize that chronic absenteeism, the definition includes any absences regardless of reason. And so I've heard from the field about the 5 mental health days, the ability for students to still do coursework from home at times if they choose not to come to school. Many teachers are still making lessons available online. I don't know that there's one thing a school can do to address the chronic absenteeism, but it certainly needs to be a conversation across all of our districts and all of our schools about how are we engaging our kids on a daily basis and building a culture of belongingness, a sense of belongingness for all of our kids so that they want to come to school every day. That needs to be a topic. But despite that one element that continues to be a struggle, it's good to see that it has not impacted our graduation rate or ninth graders on track or other key indicators.
Well, it would seem to me that schools are helping ensure kids are succeeding in spite of those challenges related to absenteeism. I mean, like you, my dad was a former educator and former school principal and superintendent. And when I would talk to him about student success, he always went to attendance first thing. Like if kids are not in school, they're not learning. And so obviously we need to continue to that. And that's part of the reason IPA has various trainings related to that very topic. And then other things, obviously, that feed into that. But what I appreciate so much about this year's report, Tony, with regards to the graduation rate is, sometimes that gets discounted in relationship to looking at the performance on the test score, the tests. But to me, we really, I think, over-index the test in comparison to things like graduation rate and ninth grade on track. Because when you think about graduation rate and you think about ninth grade on track, that's a compilation of the kid's total educational experience, right? Versus just, an assessment one moment in time. Really, kids graduating from school or where they're at on track to graduate in ninth grade, it's a testament to how they're doing with their entire educational experience. And we really, really need to celebrate where that's sitting right now, particularly, where we've been with these kids over the last couple of years, because every one of these students has been a part of the pandemic, of course. And, I don't want to be overly dramatic about it, but that's a really big deal for the state to be in the position where it is right now, to have the highest graduation rate couple of years post-COVID. That's pretty special, in my opinion.
It is. I mean, and I agree with you that it's important for us to assess where kids are, and certainly, federal law requires us to report out on it on an annual basis in a report card type of format. It's important data to have, but as a local superintendent, as a local principals, the state report card is a lagging indicator for most of these metrics, with the exception of a few. And we know that the importance of local formative assessments, classroom assessments, that really you're telling teachers how students are doing in that moment in time, is the most predictive information that a teacher and a principal has to determine whether a child is on track.
Yeah, you bet. Well, just grateful for where we are. Appreciate the various supports and things that the agency has available for schools with regards to this. Just any other thoughts related to the report card, Tony?
Well, I wanted to just point out a couple of the visualizations that are new this year for principals to use. When you go into the accountability tab on the report card, you can see now, we get a lot of questions about how do I end up as a commendable school or in the targeted status or comprehensive status. So there's a new graphic that our team put together that's a little schoolhouse that actually gives a visualization to show you as a school leader, here's why your school ended up as either commendable, exemplary, targeted, or comprehensive. It takes the guessing out of how did I end up in this, with this particular status. And I also want to remind the principals that when you change buckets, everything is relative to every other school district in the state, right? And every other school in the state. Because the way we do our accountability system in Illinois, it's a rank and sort system. So only the top 10% of schools in the state can be exemplary. Only the top 10%. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
It's
if
like
90% of your kids are meeting the state standards. If you're not in the top 10% rank and sort, you're not going to be exemplary.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've got the bottom 5% of the Title I schools that are comprehensive. And, I think everybody knows how they're identified, but it's all done in a rank and sort instead of a criterion reference system. So I know principals know that, but when parents come forward and start asking questions, it's always good to keep that in your back pocket to help explain to them, how the status was determined. And then that new schoolhouse, I think, is another graphic you can point parents to show this is how we ended up with this designation.
Yeah. Well, it's grading on a curve, basically, right? So the example I use was something like that is if you had 10 kids take a test and everybody in the grading scale was typically 90 to 100, but you're going to grade on a curve. If every kid got a 90 or above, typically that'd be an A. But if that kid got a 90 and versus the one that got a 99, that means they got an F, if you know what I mean. So, the criterion based something that maybe that's something we can have a whole other IPA talk about at some point in time, but would definitely be worth looking at. And I do, though, I am grateful for the clarity for schools to have when it comes to communicating with it, because putting all this stuff together, the numbers and how that works can be a little bit complex, and being able to share very clearly with parents how that works or adding some clarity that is extremely helpful. So let's pivot on to another topic, Tony, that we heard a little bit about here recently, and that's, the governor is obviously been very supportive of early childhood education long before even becoming governor of the state of Illinois, which is something, we're sure grateful for here. And to see that support then roll on into his time as governor. He held a press conference. I know you were a part of that not that long ago, talking about creating, in essence, and I'll use this terminology, but there's probably a different way to describe it, kind of a new department for new agency, possibly for early childhood. And I know there's some things that they're looking at here in the early going, knowing that, the General Assembly and this would have to work through the legislative process for something to be more permanent. But just kind of curious about, your perspective on this and what we might be seeing with this down the road.
Absolutely. So this actually came out of a recommendation of an early childhood commission that the governor convened several years ago. And they made a recommendation that, we have early childhood, everything birth through age 5 is in a variety of different state agencies. We have the State Board of Education, obviously, that deals with the early childhood block grant, and other elements related to typically schools, but also community-based organizations that receive that grant. You have the Department of Human Services that gets involved in multiple programs for early childhood centers. And then you have DCFS that licenses home daycare facilities. And so you've got this, if you're a parent, a provider, or a stakeholder, you never know which agency you're going to go to. So in my brief time here in this role as state superintendent, I've participated every week in phone calls around early childhood education. And you realize the complexity of this system of trying to serve these youngest learners. So as the state is looking to invest through Smart Start, the $75 million year over year to continue to increase early childhood, to eliminate all the deserts for pre-K, the time is right for us to have the conversation about how do we best serve families and students to make sure that we don't have kids falling through the cracks. We have a really complex system where families don't know exactly who to go to for which service. Providers, again, also not knowing who to go to for which service. And so many other states saw this as an opportunity. New Mexico is an example of a state that just moved to this same model, and has seen great success in better serving families. So from my perspective, is if it better serves the kids of Illinois and the families of Illinois and makes it easier, I'm all in favor. And so we're supporting the effort. Ann Whalen will be our coordinator for the transition to this new program. She's a senior advisor to me here at the State Board of Education. She'll be working with the State Board of Education in coordinating all this work as we look to, over the next few years, transition to some other governance model.
Well, obviously, we're in the very early going, and so there's a lot to be fleshed out, but sure appreciate, kind of your perspective and an update on that, and obviously have much more to come in the months and years ahead. So another thing that the agency's been working through here, Tony, is the state budget hearings. I think we're all done with those at this point now, correct? Or is there still, it's November 7th, so we'll see when people actually get an opportunity to watch this, but if not wrapped up, we're pretty close.
They are wrapped up. We held a series of hearings. We actually had significant more participation this year than we've had in prior years in terms of budget priorities. So this is my first, I'll put a little caveat on this. This is my first experience at the State Board in developing a budget that then gets put in front of the State Board of Education and then gets transmitted over to the General Assembly. I was here for the appropriations hearings last year in both the House and the Senate, but it was for a budget that I had no part in putting together. So this is all new to me. So I'll just give you, I know that we have to take a proposal to the State Board of Education. It's got to fall within some parameters of what's, based on the forecasting from the General Assembly of what might be available in terms of resources. And then within that, we will put together some budgetary recommendations. What we heard from the hearings was a lot of requests. Requests for $550 million in EBF, requests for additional career and technical education funding, requests to continue mentoring for principals and for teachers. The list goes on and on and on and on. Certainly, the state is not going to be in a position to fund everything. And the State Board is going to have to make some difficult decisions about what gets put in the budget for them to take forward to the General Assembly. So I'm glad to have any more conversation about the budget that you'd like to, whichever way you want to go on that one. But I've not yet finalized the budget to take it forward to the board.
Sure. No, and I know you guys have, you're still early in the process, really, now that you're through the hearings and have to take. Of course, the governor's, I'm sure, got some priorities of things that he would like to see that would have to be accounted for. The board and the agency overall would have to look at that. I would just offer, as far as our discussions, at least where IPA is concerned, Tony, with EBF in particular, there's not much that is probably discussed that we aren't supportive of in some fashion or another of all the various things that were proposed. Obviously, mentoring and coaching and the principal pipeline that we've got, all of that are things that we're very interested in seeing continue. But more broadly, we have always, though, put that in second position behind making sure that we hit that statutory target of $350 million in EBF, and absolutely want to see that continue. And I do recognize this, the strong desire some have, and it's not that we don't either, wanting to see it be much higher than that. And I know 550 is a number that's been floated around. I think from our perspective, though, there's always a little bit of uncertainty of what the future could look like from a fiscal perspective, those kinds of things. And while the current forecasts look pretty good for this current fiscal year, we've got a Fed that's been trying to tamp down inflation and kind of slow the economy down. And so I think we have to take that into account. And I think that with that in mind, I think where our concerns would be about pushing that much higher than where the $350 million statutory target is currently. What does that mean for evidence-based funding down the road? If we start bouncing it around past that current target of $350 million that's currently in statute, will that will that create problems for us in years to come? And you being, a former school superintendent, me working in schools years ago, there's nothing more comforting than certainty where budgeting is concerned, especially for schools where there seems to be lack of certainty. And that 350 million going in year after year, I think, has really helped with so many things. You look, we talked about the state report card. What's allowed for some of that? Yeah, we've had ESSER money, but more so than that, we've been able to have sustained funding, additional funding that's allowed for us to hire the people that we've needed in order to do what's best for our kids. And so, that's absolutely critical. And the other part is I remember the years of proration. I remember the years of whether we would even see 100 million coming in additional money into, our state funding for schools in a given year, all of that stuff. So suffice it to say, that 350 million a year feels pretty good if, because it's in statute. And the other thing, we just don't want to come across as being overly greedy either, not to throw that into the mix, but we just got to be careful with some of that stuff. So anyway.
Well, we were both in our, when I was in U46 and working on behalf of the evidence-based funding formula, we collaborated a lot along with Brent Clark and Mike Jacoby and many others.
Yep.
And in those final days of negotiating, we all agreed to the $350 million that would go in year over year. And the state made a commitment to that. It's going to be something I will continue to advocate for, is the continuation of 350 million year over year. And like you, I'm interested in stability in the long run of the EBF instead of short-term spikes. I would much rather see the state continue to ensure it keeps its commitment to that 350 million, and recognizing that there's also other things that we need to do, and also recognizing that ESSER funding, just like for local school districts, it comes to an end in local school districts, it also ends here at the state level. And so this is our last full year of ESSER funding at the state level. And that means we need to shift some things around into state funding if we're going to maintain them.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, I think the term stability hits the target right on where it needs to be. It hits the nail on the head. And I think for schools and those responsible for budgets and making sure that kids have what they need, would sure appreciate that part of it. So more to come there, obviously, as that process continues to move forward. The last thing, Tony, I wanted to just touch base with you about, because I know you're plenty busy and got other things to do, but we've had an influx of students from other countries come into the state, and not just from the southern border, not just from Venezuela, but we've seen more kids come in from Ukraine. We've seen a large group of individuals coming in from India. I know that we've seen some of that happening across the country and in our state as well, and then in some other places. And I'm not sure that we've quite seen what the effect of what's happening currently in the Middle East, what that could mean for us down the road as well. So, one of the things that I shared with our membership during our conference, which you were gracious enough to attend and provide a few remarks. But when I spoke with them on Tuesday morning, I said, regardless of what your political stance is and your personal feelings are on immigration and those kinds of issues, facts are we've got young people that are showing up at our schools that had probably no decision-making authority in them being in that spot. Yep. And so, we kind of have our own Hippocratic oath in education that we've got to take. And that is to take care of the kids that show up on our doorstep, as hard as that may be. And it's super complicated, and I sure understand that. And so, with all that being said, it's our opportunity to step up. And while it's hard, it's the hard that will be remembered and celebrated down the road. So I know that this is something that's extremely important to you. It's something that you've been looking at. And I know that the team there has been talking through and trying to do what you can. And I'm sure there's some other behind the scene things you're trying to do, both at the state and the federal level, that you probably can't get in too deeply and probably getting told no occasionally on some stuff, but appreciate the effort. What is it that schools could be looking at right now or should consider doing, when we're talking about these young people?
So first of all, I want to thank all the districts that have accepted and made part of their community these students coming in through no choice of their own. And when you said students coming in from Venezuela, let's be clear, these are kids actually coming in from other states that are shipping them to Illinois.
Yeah.
And, so talk about not really having any choice in it. The families don't even have a choice in it. They're literally loaded up on buses and transported to Illinois and arriving on the doorsteps of schools and in communities, and needing our support, needing our services, and needing our love. I mean, they need us. And the principals and the superintendents and the teachers that are stepping forward to help these families deserve to be recognized and commended for all the work they're doing. I know it's not easy. At our last state board meeting, we had several teachers come forward and talk about the impact of having a significant number of asylum seekers just suddenly in their classroom. And it's a challenge. We continue to work with the U.S. Department of Education in terms of trying to get some additional supports or even flexibility to move some of our funding around to try to support school districts. And as we do that work, just know that we will continue to support to the best of our ability asylum seekers from the state board. We're looking at options, but I would encourage, we just had a conversation about budgeting at the state level. School districts and school leaders need to be thinking about their upcoming budgets for next school year, right? They're going to start that process here before long. They'll start it in January. They need to be thinking about how do we transition supports internally within our own budget while we're doing the same thing at the state level to support these families. As kids come in, they're going to need language support. They're going to need those McKinney-Vento dollars going to support them. They're going to need, it's compelling some additional costs in transportation. So just be cognizant of those increased costs and try to build them into your building budget or the school district budget. And then we will continue to do our part at the state level to see what we can do to provide additional resources and support as well.
Appreciate that. And I know that's another thing that we'll probably have further conversations about moving forward. Well, Tony, as always, there's probably a list of 4 or 5 other plus things that we could discuss, but we'll just wrap it up here. And just as always, appreciate your time and willingness to come on and dig in on a couple of these key issues.
Anytime. Glad to be a part of it, Jason.
Appreciate that. Well, again, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director here at IPA with Dr. Tony Sanders, Illinois State Superintendent of Schools. Thanks for joining us for this IPA talk. And as always, if there's anything that IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call or reach us out on the web at ilprinciples.org. Take care.